What are the implications of the fact that Samsung essentially owns Android to a certain extent?
Well, that's potentially a positive, right? Because Samsung can now do the things I wish Apple would do on top of Android, because they've got the whole system, and I hope they do that.
So what should the next big thing at Samsung be?
Well, if I were Samsung, I'd be asking the very simple question, how do I become as good at making software that makes customers successful as I am at making semiconductors and flat panel displays and phones? Because they are the world's best at high-volume consumer electronics manufacturing for a lot of the components that go into it. But software has not historically been a strength.
If anything, it seems that Samsung, when it comes to the smart TV, for example, is way far ahead of everybody else and Apple.
Well, the way I look at it is that none of that really matters if there's nothing to do with the smart TV. Right? The trick is, how do you get interesting stuff onto it? And, I've got a little investment in a company called Player that makes a device that's this big and lets you get anything off of your phone or off your computer onto your big flat panel TV. Well, until they solve that problem, right, then having a smart TV doesn't mean anything, because you can't plug anything into it. And to me, that's what that's a problem that will be resolved fairly quickly. But what's the stuff how do you get stuff onto it? That's the trick.
So how do you see the Apple-Samsung war playing out over, 5, 10 years, 2 decades? I mean, are they going to continue to be on a collision course?
I have no idea. I mean, I look at this and I go, a year ago, it never occurred to me that Apple would be having the problem it's having now. I really thought that they understood that they had differentiated themselves from Android, and that their optimal strategy was different than Android's optimal strategy. And yet, because at the beginning I never understood why Android went around apps, because apps reinforced Apple's strength, right? But where Android's about the web. I mean, to me, I don't understand why Google isn't all over HTML5, because that would really hurt Apple. And Apple, so I look at everybody as having more problems than benefits right now. You guys all talk about this like, isn't this exciting, this big competition? I'm looking, to me, it just looks like the Keystone Cops. It just looks like guys who don't understand their customers, don't really understand the use cases, because they're changing. I mean, when these products were introduced, you had to convince people. Now, everybody's totally convinced, and they're begging for different classes of things, and the vendors aren't listening. The vendors are still trying to go after the 10% of the market that hasn't bought a smartphone yet. What
about Apple, Google? Do they continue on a collision course?
Oh, for sure, because Google's strategy is so different from Apple's. And
what do you think of Google buying Waze?
It's a search engine, right? I mean, Google.
But when you talk about integrating your life, if Waze knows where you are.
Well, sure. And I'm saying what I would rather have in a perfect world, okay, is, Google has not shown itself to be a particularly careful shepherd of personal data. So I'm personally cautious about using some of their apps, simply because I don't like the experience that comes with Gmail. I don't want to sit there and say I'm going to Boston and then suddenly get a bunch of ads for hotels in Boston. That is very creepy to me. And so I'd rather work with somebody who wasn't quite so commercial with my ideas. And but I think Waze is a great move for them, right? I mean, it's a cool product. People really love it. It fits into Google like a hand in the glove. I mean, Google's situation is great. I wish they'd done Android differently, because I think there was a bigger opportunity than the one they did. But the one they did is humongous. And, they will, as long as they can get somebody besides Samsung to be successful in phones, then I think Android's future is really bright. If it's just Samsung, it's over.